the respect of their government, the rule of law, free and fair elections, and civilian command and control of the military and fundamental tenets of democracy. It is essential that the government of Pakistan uphold these ideals. I encourage the Pakistani government to continue working to develop strong democratic institutions and protect the rights and freedoms of the Pakistani people. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this resolution and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 901 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being the affirmative.
The yeas and nays.
Gentleman from Georgia requests the yeas and nays. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4132 as amended.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 4132, a bill to provide for the imposition of sanctions with respect to forced organ harvesting within the People's Republic of China and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton, each will control 20 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative aids to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous materials on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, for decades, the House of Representatives has been raising alarms about the ghoulish organ harvesting perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. The People's Republic of China executes thousands of people a year, several times more than the rest of the world combined. But they hide those killings from outsiders, claiming that the execution information is a state secret. But behind that veil of secrecy lies a terrifying reality. For years, testimony and investigative reports have asserted that organs are forcibly harvested as part of an extremely lucrative trade in human organs, for transplantation into those in the good graces of the party and for those, including foreigners, willing to pay top dollar. As summarized in 2021 by United Nations human rights officials, and I quote, "Forced organ harvesting in China appears to be targeting specific ethnic, linguistic, or religious minorities held in detention, often without being explained the reasons for arrest or given arrest warrants," end quote. Falun Gong adherents and Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang are among those reportedly targeted. Certain religions and ethnic minorities detainees are reportedly subject to non-consensual tests not required of other prisoners, such as blood tests, organ exams, and ultrasound scans, with the results being entered into a database of living organ sources. These depraved CCP abuses must stop. This bill before us today requires the identification and sanctioning of those involved in China's involuntary organ harvesting. I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, and his bipartisan co-sponsors for introducing this legislation. I also commend Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Meeks for marking it up and getting it to the floor. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. From Arizona is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 4132, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 4132 imposes sanctions on individuals who knowingly and directly engaged in or facilitated the involuntary harvesting of organs within the People's Republic of China. The State Department's 2023 country reports on human rights practices highlight that the government of the PRC has been accused of forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, including religious and spiritual adherents. The illegal harvesting of organs is not only a violation of human rights, but also an assault on human dignity. Imagine the terror and despair of those who are imprisoned for their beliefs, only to have their organs forcibly taken from them. These individuals are subjected to unimaginable suffering, their most basic rights stripped away, their bodies violated in the most grotesque manner. This is not just a statistic or a distant issue. These are real people, people with families, with dreams, who endure unbelievable pain and fear. The House has already spoken on this issue by passing Mr. Smith's Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act in March. Today, we have another opportunity to take a stand against this inhumane practice. By supporting H.R. 4132, we are sending a clear message that the United States will not tolerate such egregious violations of human rights. This bill ensures that those who knowingly and directly engaged in or facilitated forced organ harvesting face significant sanctions. We don't know a lot about this crime of forced organ harvesting, but the report required in this bill will give us a better understanding of the scope of the problem so that we may address it in a targeted way. We cannot remain silent in the face of such cruelty. We must stand up for the victims, show them that they are not forgotten, and hold the perpetrators accountable. It is our moral duty to act, to protect the vulnerable, and to uphold human dignity. Therefore, I encourage my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, the author of this bill.
I thank my friend, the gentleman from Georgia, for the time, and I thank my colleagues for their support of the bill. It's amazing, and it's very frightening that in 2024 we're having this discussion on the floor of the House of Representatives. But since the early 1990s, the Falun Gong has been targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, Falun Gong is a spiritual practice of mind and body in which adherents follow the core principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance. In 1999, the Chinese Communist Party estimated that 70 to 100 million people were practicing Falun Gong, the equivalent of 5 to 7% of the Chinese population today. Mr. Speaker, Falun Gong's popularity quickly initiated violent persecution, including illegal detentions, forced labor, torture, and yes, forced organ harvesting, a form of mass murder. This is something out of 30s and Joseph Mengele, but it's happening today. On July 20th, 1999, the Chinese Communist Party detained hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners and banned any further practice of their religion, of this religion. Since this date, the Chinese Communist Party has continued to escalate its systemic and systematic oppression against Falun Gong practitioners. On March 1st of 2020, the Independent Tribunal into Forced Organ Harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China found there to be an incomprehensible gap between the number of transplant operations carried out in the PRC in comparison to the number of eligible registered donors. What does that mean? That means in China, if you've got the money, there is no waiting list for you to get an organ. Go anywhere else in the civilized world and find that. What would that mean? Well, that means there's a ready, Mr. Speaker, there's a ready supply of these organs, because there is. Now, their report concluded that forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale, and that Falun Gong practitioners have been and probably are the main source of organs for forced organ harvesting. In the U.S., many of those working in organ transplantation and those who benefit from transplantation systems are likely unaware. They just don't know of China's illegal practices. Through its repressive control of information, the CCP has created the infrastructure and resources needed to persecute millions of its own citizens. Not only Falun Gong practitioners, but also Uyghurs, Tibetans, Christians, and any other Chinese Communist Party, any others the Chinese Communist Party chooses to target. This bill is the first binding commitment by Congress to take strong legal action against the persecution and forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong, making Falun Gong the centerpiece of legislation, an action long overdue after 25 years. The Falun Gong Protection Act imposes sanctions on those who participate in or facilitate the forced harvesting of organs in China. This bill directs the Secretary of State to determine whether the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong constitutes crimes against humanity or genocide, alongside a required report on the CCP's organ transplant policies and practices. The Communist Party of China doesn't want us to see. They're not going to, when you take a trip to China and see all the wonderful things and the wonderful people there, they're not going to invite you to see this. It's going to take us looking. It's going to take us focusing on it. Additionally, H.R. 4132 makes it U.S. policy to avoid any cooperation with the PRC in the illicit organ transplant issue and industry. With that, my friend from Georgia, I yield the balance of my time and urge adoption of this bill and thank my friends on both sides of the aisle for their support.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman is recognized.
I reserve the remainder of my time, right to close.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I'm prepared to close if the other side has no further speakers.
The gentleman is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, by supporting H.R. 4132, we are sending a clear message that the United States will sanction those who knowingly and directly engaged in or facilitated the involuntary harvesting of organs within the People's Republic of China. This legislation sheds light on and condemns this horrific practice and holds to account those responsible. I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this important bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, in closing, the idea that a member of a religious minority could be targeted and killed so that their organs could be harvested is worthy of a horror movie. It violates the basic tenets of our God-given rights. But that is allegedly what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing for years. This bill before us today will impose visa and property blocking sanctions against those responsible for such atrocities. It deserves our unanimous support. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4132 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.